This is critical thinking in the axial muscles lab, and here are the questions. So this is the first question, second question, and here is the third question. So let's look at the first question, where it asks you to identify a very important action of the muscle shown here. So now here you have to think of an action that is really important and compared to any of the other actions. So let's look at some of the actions which are given here. The first one is elevate the tongue. This muscle, of course, is the genioglossus, and elevating the tongue is not one of its actions, because in order to elevate the tongue you have to have something that's going to pull it from the top. So whereas this muscle, when it acts, you can see these fan-shaped fibers. When this muscle acts, it is going to pull the tongue down. So elevate the tongue is not one of its actions. Depressing the tongue is one of its actions, but it's not a very important action. So therefore this would not be one of the choices. Let's look at the third choice, which says protract the tongue. Now this happens to be a very important action of the muscle. Protract is also another word used for protrude. So protrusion of the tongue, or protrude the tongue. And the posterior fibers, these fibers which go to the back, you can't see the other part because it's hidden by these muscles. When they contract, they pull this part of the tongue closer to themselves. So this part of the tongue comes here. So with the result, actually, the tongue protrudes outside. So this is a very important action of this muscle, and in fact, it's called a life-saving action, so that this tongue does not fall back and block the airway. So in fact, during anesthesia, the anesthetists actually hold their fingers under the mandible and push on this posterior part and keep the tongue protruded so that it doesn't fall back and block the airway. So this is the answer to this question. But let's look at the fourth choice, which says depress the mandible. And again, you can see this part here, this is the mandible. Any muscle which is from below, which goes up to insert on the mandible, only that muscle is capable of depressing or pulling down the mandible. This muscle which is this way, which is fan-shaped, will not have an action in depressing the mandible. So even this is not an action in any case of this muscle. So the answer to this question is the third, and this is, as I said, a life-saving muscle, along with another life-saving muscle, which is the posterior cricoarytenoid. Now let's look at the second question, which asks you which of these muscles is not supplied by the facial nerve. So let's look at all the muscles shown here. The first one, A, which is this circular muscle, is orbicularis oculi, because it's going around the eye, and so when it contracts, it kind of squeezes the eye shut, so it closes the eye. The second one is the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis. So this is the frontal belly. This muscle is the temporalis. D is the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis, and E is the platysma. Now of these, A, which is orbicularis oculi, B, which is the frontal belly, D, which is the occipital belly, and E, which is the platysma, these are all muscles of facial expression, and they are supplied by the facial nerve, because each one of these muscles acts and causes some kind of facial action. Orbicularis oculi, as I said, helps you to close the eyes. B, which is frontal belly, when it raises, when it contracts, it pulls on the eyebrows and gives it a surprise look. D, which is again, these two act together really, the occipital and the frontal belly. Because this pulls, then this will go this way. So when this contracts, so this, both of them do the same thing. And E, platysma, is one of the muscles which acts on the skin of the neck and tightens the skin of the neck. This muscle actually goes up and becomes a muscle at the angle of the mouth called the risorius, so which gives a grimace. So again, they act, all of these muscles are muscles of facial expression and supplied by the facial nerve. C, which is the temporalis muscle. This muscle is a muscle of mastication because it acts on the mandible. This muscle is inserted here on the coronoid process of the mandible. It acts on the mandible to close the mouth. So it close the jaw. it pulls the mandible up. So this is a muscle of mastication and is supplied by the fifth cranial nerve, the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve, which is the fifth cranial nerve. So the answer to this question is C, because this is the only muscle which is not supplied in this picture, which is not supplied by the facial nerve. Now let's look at the next question, which asks you, what does the arrow point to and what is their functional significance? That means these structures, it's only pointing to one, but it's these others also. What is the functional significance of these structures? So the first choice is bone. So this does not point to bone. So this is in muscle, it's not pointing to bone. So this itself is wrong. And the functional significance is not that it represents different muscles. So even this part is wrong. Let's look at the next choice, which says tendinous intersections. Yes, anything shown in white is a tendon. So these are tendinous intersections shown in this muscle, which is the rectus abdominis. So this muscle is called the rectus abdominis, and tendons or aponeuroses are always shown in white. For example, here this is the aponeurosis of the external oblique muscle, and deep to that you can see the internal, this one is the internal oblique, and this one is the transversus abdominis, the deepest muscle. So these are tendinous intersections, but their functional significance means how does it help the body? While this statement that these tendinous intersections do represent the developmental origin of this muscle, because this muscle develops from different myotomes, that's not its functional significance. Functional significance, when we have the word functional significance, means what is its function? How does it help the body? Now, while it's a representation of the developmental origin, that's not its functional significance. So therefore, this answer is also wrong. Third, this obviously does not represent nerves, so this answer is wrong too. And let's look at the fourth choice, which says tendinous intersections, which is right, and increase the overall power of the muscle. This is also right. So this is the right answer, because how it increases the overall power of the muscle is that by being present, by virtue of being present here, it divides the muscle, the entire muscle, into several short segments. So each of these segments acts like a short muscle. So it overall, the power of the muscle increases instead of being one long muscle. Remember, a long muscle has a greater range but less power, where a short muscle has more power. So therefore, this is the correct answer to this question.